Hi and welcome to this next one in our series on Revelation. And today I want to be passing through from chapter 6 through to chapter 20. My goodness, you say, how's he going to cover all that? I have absolutely no idea. But I'm not going to go over it. This is like a first pass through. What I want to be doing is looking at seals, trumpets and bowls mainly, which you'll see are in those next few chapters, and that really the focus is on judgment, because a large amount of Revelation is taken up with God's judgment, and I want to try and deal with that to a certain extent in this sort of first flyover these chapters. And we will probably come back next time to look at some of these chapters again, but focus on some of the characters that we find in these chapters. But first of all, I want to think about the judgment. I want to think about there can be such confusion about judgment, and some can err too much on the side of grace and some too much on judgment. We have to understand that God has, it's like two sides of a coin. On one side there is his grace and his love, and his love goes through whatever, but his grace. On the other side is judgment. And because God is a just God, he cannot just allow sin and evil to happen. It's wrong just to, and all of us would feel the same way, because we are made in the image of God, and there's something in us that wants justice done. So when we see something really evil, we want justice done. I was watching the news last night, and there was a story from Yemen of a very young girl. I think she was probably about 8. I can't remember. And her brother, I think, was about 11, and they'd gone off to collect water. And they walked along a road where the children in Yemen, I mean, it's been destroyed area, but the children in Yemen actually play down this road and all the time. And she was coming back with her brother, and she was shot in the head by a sniper. And fortunately, she has survived, but physically she's getting better, but emotionally she's rather a mess, as you can understand. And apparently a lot of snipers in Yemen at the moment are targeting children. How appalling. How can anybody literally target a 6-year-old girl who is just out playing with her family, or out actually helping at that point, collecting water? But you know, doesn't something in us call out for justice when we see those sorts of things? We see evil and we say, justice must be done. God's the same. And he won't let evil just go on for and nothing get done whatsoever. So God has done everything he can. He doesn't want to come in judgment. He's given his son. He's done everything he can. He gave Jesus so that we can enter in to a relationship with God, know him, know his love, know his peace, and not be in a place of judgment, but be in a place of living in his care and protection. Amazing. That's what he's done at great personal cost. Can't ask him to do any more. He is God of God, God's Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and we need to understand that. So again, broad sweep then. Chapter 6 begins with 7 seals, followed by chapter 7, we got trumpets, and then 7 bowls come on later on. And some see this as a sequence of events, one after the other, but it's more likely that it's actually the same period of time from the resurrection probably up to when Jesus comes back again. Because if you look at it, the final seal contains the trumpets and so on. So it's rather like those Russian nesting dolls where you open them up and you've got one inside the other, and then you open that one up and there's another one inside. You know, it's almost like these are nesting one inside the other, and they're probably just a reiteration of the similar judgments. But it's done this way because it's just increases the emotional effect on us, if you like. So the 7 seals, that's where you've got the horsemen, so put into all sorts of films and stories that, talk about the horsemen of the apocalypse and so on. A lot of the judgments there are quite normal things that you would see on a not a day-to-day event, but these are things that happen, earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever, plagues, all these things that are not unusual in the world, let's put it that way. Apart from the sixth one, where it talks about heavenly bodies being shaken out of the sky and so on. But again, let's look symbolically, because, you go back to Joseph. Do you remember his dream? And he talked to his parents, and he saw his parents as the sun and the moon bowing down to him, and his brothers as the stars and so on. So that, even in that time when it's symbolic, it's dream type language. This is apocalyptic. It's the type of writing that we have here. Let's not get too caught up with the symbols. And from there on through to chapter 20, we have different scenes of judgment, and they're all about God judging Babylon, this evil anti-culture of idolatry and chaos. Babylon, and the whole thing about Revelation is proof that Babylon loses, Babylon is fallen. We get that over and over throughout this. And in John's day, Babylon would have been Rome, with its anti-God philosophy and so on. And John was encouraging Christians to put up with what they were going through, persecution, trouble, and so on, that they had from this Roman Empire, because this was Babylon. He was doing it as a secret code, if you like, but this Babylon was going to fall, was beaten already, in a sense. And I would suggest that Babylon was then, and it was meant to be, and still is, something that is ongoing throughout each age of this world. Babylon was not just then. If it was, then Revelation said something for the people back then. And of course, if you take a totally preterist view, I talked about that in my talk on the different views of Revelation. If you took a totally preterist view, then you would say that it was all for back then, as it were. But I believe that there is something in this, that in every society, in every era of the world, you see Babylon, an anti-God culture that we are called to stand against. And this is what John is warning against, and we need to be aware of our own time. So I want to encourage you, here's a thought: where is Babylon? Where can you see Babylon today? Where can you see a culture that stands against God? It could be an economic thing, it could be a political thing, it could be a religious thing. It can still stand against God, and it doesn't have to be very far away. We can see it. It subtly gets in. That was the point about Babylon. It was subtle. It was so difficult. Read some of the letters to the churches. Read how they could so easily get caught up into following what Rome wanted, following the Roman ways, worshipping their idols and so on. You have to be careful you don't get caught up in it. Okay. One theologian, just to say, the judgments are probably symbolic, not literal. We got things like, you're not going to see a white horse, you're not going to see birds gorged with the flesh of fallen warriors. John is using rather repellent terms to shake you up. It's a bit of shock and awe, to wake us up, to wake the church up to what is going on, and to be aware for those who are sleeping. And one theologian writes that the cosmic plagues mentioned in these trumpets and bowls are not natural disasters, but are the result of what we've done. They're a result of ecological destruction, the arms race, irritational consumerism, and the irrational use of technology and natural resources, as he said. Doesn't that make some sense? Can we not see, actually, when we're not following God's way, how we live in such a way that we actually create some of these problems? Look at global warming if you want to. Because of our consumerism, we have used too much of this planet's resources, and we have affected the climate, so it seems, the climate of this planet. And I'm just throwing that out as a thought to you. but temperatures have changed so much over the last few years, and increased rainfall we've seen in this country, difference in temperature, we've got the melting of the ice caps, we've got all sorts of things. And how much is that really a part, if you like, a judgment of God, but brought about by us not walking in his way? So it's not like God has had to say, I'm going to judge you and do this. It's that we are not walking God's way. Just a thought. I'm not saying that's right. It's good to look at these things and ask ourselves these questions and not get stuck into one view, which is what I talked about at the beginning. Okay. And the seals that show chains of events of that history knows too well. One interpreter said this first tidal wave of violent imagery expresses the apocalyptic insight that the world's suffering is allowed by God, but is more fundamentally a result of sin. Okay, so is it divine punishment or human sin? Well, it's probably a bit of both. Hard to say. I believe there, at the end of time, God will judge, but it's possible that there is a sense in which this judgment is happening now, but it's not like God has to make a decree. It's almost like because we do not walk God's way, then we take that judgment. Think about it this way: if you live a life where you get caught up, let's just say drugs and alcohol become a massive thing, it's going to affect perhaps your family, your relationships, and so on. Is that God's judgment? No, but it is a result of your sin. And it's a consequence of how God has set the world up. So in a sense, God is involved in that. Interesting. Okay. So Richard Bortman, sorry, just to say that you'll see pictures of the judgments mentioned in here. Look at Exodus, look at the plagues. There's very much the same sort of thing we see. It's like these pictures, it's almost like John has taken those and used those as well. Richard Bortman has said, John has taken some of his contemporaries' worst experiences and worst fears of wars and natural disasters, blown them up to apocalyptic proportions and cast them in biblically elusive terms. The point is not to predict a series of events. The point is to evoke and explore the meaning of divine judgment which is impending on the sinful world. There's some interesting thoughts for you to ponder with. Probably worth mentioning Armageddon as well, which is mentioned a lot when people talk about judgment and so on, this great war that's going to happen. Despite the speculation about when and where the battle will be, Revelation only mentions it in passing. And it really is that it's just a logical location for a symbolic battle. Because it's been the site of so many battles in the past. The plain of Megiddo, that's been a site of many battles. And so John's picked that under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. It's probably not a literal battle, but don't attack me on that one. We don't need a battle. I don't know where I stand on any of these things yet, because I believe that there are many interpretations. I believe we will understand more of it as time goes on. I have not nailed my colours to the mast on one particular theory. And I would say I don't exclude any. Let's be open to what God might say through us. The hardest thing is when you just get stuck in one and you refuse to listen to anyone else. There's what I want you to do is see at least two things as we look at this. One, that there are a number of different ways of seeing Revelation. To only look at one is to be blinkered in our approach and put us at risk at separating from other Christians and saying, I don't agree with you, you've got it all wrong, and separating out. And I've seen that done, and it's heartbreaking because that is not God's will. Jesus' last prayer on this earth was that we would be one. to actually separate out from somebody who's a Christian, who has an honest view on Revelation, which they've studied and which they understand. And let's be honest, all of these views have got some very clever, intelligent, deeply spiritual theologians who have studied this and understand it better than we ever will do, and looked at the original languages and so on. They've come up with a number of different views. How are we going to say this is what it is? Don't separate from someone. Love them, and if you agree to disagree, that's fine. It really is not a major thing, because we don't know yet. And as I've said before, when it does happen, when Jesus comes back, I think we'll all be a bit surprised anyway. And number two, we're dealing with apocalyptic writing, which deals in symbols, and they're deliberately intensified. It's meant to be that way. It's not so much meant to be about imparting information, it's about imparting an experience. There is something poetic about what you get in Revelation. It's meant to affect you inside, and if it shocks us a bit, well, that's fine too, okay, because it's meant to wake us up a little bit. And it's not, remember, we're not used to this sort of writing in this day and age, but they would have understood it a whole lot more than us, and probably would have been, some of them would have been shocked at the way that we interpret it. So next time we'll look at some of the main characters in the book and pick that out a little bit. I mean, who are the two witnesses? What is the Antichrist? And if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, don't worry. I've read the end of the book and we win. God bless.